Hi there, St. Pius. It's Father John. I'm speaking to you from my office here at the parish on a quiet Friday afternoon, a very late Friday afternoon, in fact. And I wanted just to share with you some thoughts and some reflections that I've had with regard to the news that's been very much present, in our national and our local news, and present also, no doubt, in our own hearts and minds, and that's the discovery of the unmarked graves, those 215 unmarked graves at the residential school in Kamloops. And of course, there's been so much discussion of that, and rightly so. It's a terrible, terrible evil, and something that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be spoken of. So it's good that we are doing so. And I was reflecting a little bit on the intensity of the response. It's justified entirely by the circumstances that were there, and it's justified also in the sense that we in the Catholic Church were directly involved. That school was run by one of our religious orders, and certainly, as they have acknowledged in the past and acknowledged once again, they failed. And they failed those children, they failed their families. The whole system was a failure. It was a tragedy, and it should never have happened. Many have acknowledged that, many have spoken of it. I'm certainly adding nothing by saying that. But what I did want to do was just reflect a little bit on some stories from my own life that brought to mind. And there was a couple of moments that were sort of beginnings for me. At a certain stage in my life, I was raised in a small town. I went away for quite a number of years to school and for work in a larger community. At a certain stage in my life, I returned to that small town. Of course, it was many years later. And one of the things that had changed was that we had all aged. At that time, I had not aged to the point that I have now. But many of those whom I'd known in my youth, or the parents of those whom I'd known in my youth, or even grandparents of those people, were getting on in years. And what had happened when I returned was I began to attend funerals on a regular basis, which I really hadn't done during my years away for whatever reason. The connections of a small town perhaps magnify the amount that one feels the responsibility and the need to attend and to participate in those events. And so I began to do that on a regular basis, which I had not done to that point. And I can recall as I started to do it a couple of times, and I really hadn't had a lot of experience of it, I did it, and I remember coming in the receiving line and feeling completely and utterly inadequate to the task. I knew what had happened. I knew the weight of the loss of a life, the loss of the loved one. And I just knew that nothing I could say would make it better. Nothing I could say would be appropriate to the moment. And so I struggled through a couple of those events. And I recall speaking to my sister, who had returned home a number of years before me and had been down this road a little bit and is a wiser person than I. I remember talking to her and saying, like, what do you say? How can you say anything? What's worthy of that moment? And she said, what you say when you come into the receiving line at a funeral is, I'm sorry for your loss. And I realized that that's a profound truth, because I was right. There's nothing I could have said that was up to the task of changing the experience of that loss for those people. But in thinking that I had to be up to that task, I was misleading myself. I was misguided. What I needed to say was, I'm sorry for your loss. Because that's all I can say. And it's not enough. It wasn't enough then. It's not enough now. But it's all I can say. And then life goes on, and I enter into the seminary, and I begin preparing to become a priest. And in the course of that preparation, just as with Jonathan this year here at St. Pius, I was asked as part of my preparation to preach at not at funeral masses, because that's not something that happens, but at the vigil services, the prayer services that very often happen the evening before. And I remember coming to the very first one that I had to preach at, and it was the father of a relatively young family who died of cancer. And I remember being quite overwhelmed by the responsibility And again, thinking, what can I say? There's nothing that I can bring to this moment that is worthy of this moment, that will change this moment in some way. It's just not possible. I'm not up to the task. It's not enough. Whatever I say is not enough. And there's, again, a very real sense in which that is true. It is just true. That's it. Nothing I can say with my own words, with my own thoughts, even with my own heart, nothing I can say can change the situation. Nothing I can say is really worthy of the import, of the weight of that moment of loss. Again, just as in earlier days, as someone attending a funeral, so now as someone who is preaching at a funeral or at a vigil. I'm not up to the task, because the task is bigger than I am. It's bigger than any of us, because life and death are bigger than us, and they remind us of our own fragility and of our brokenness. And nothing that we can bring in a purely human way can change that. And I think, in a certain sense, that's the moment that we're in now as a country with regard to this situation. Nothing that can be said, nothing that has been said, nothing that will be said will be up to the weight, the import of this moment in our national experience. Certainly not going to be up to the weight, the import of this moment in the lives of those families and of those communities. We can't say anything that will change it. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing is to be said, but it does mean that we need to reflect, and reflect carefully. And one of the things that upon which we need to reflect is my experience, that experience of desiring something, desiring to give something, or perhaps to receive something that really can't be given or can't be received. I wanted to change the experience. I wanted to make it better. I wanted to do something that was beyond my capacity. And again, I'm not saying that nothing needs to be said. Much needs to be said. Apologies have been offered. Apologies need to be offered. Apologies will be offered. But I would just ask people to reflect and consider whether or not we are putting a greater burden on the things, and the very real things, that we can do in terms of recompense and reconciliation and sorrow and apologies, putting too great a burden on those things without even knowing it or without even reflecting on it, that we're somehow hoping or expecting, without even perhaps being consciously aware of it, that we can make it better, that we can make it right. If only this happens, if only that happens, if only this person says this, or if only that person says that, or if this organization takes responsibility for that. All of those things need to happen. All of those things must happen. Most of them have happened, and they will happen again. But I'm fearful that we're looking for something more than we can ever receive. As I was looking to give more than I was capable of giving in those moments, because they're just too big for us. And in our Catholic Christian faith, we understand that very well. We don't trust in our own power to make everything right. We trust in the God who loved us so much that he sent his only Son into this world to be with us and to suffer for us, to be tortured, to die for our sake. And through that gift, through that self-offering, and through that gift alone, things ultimately can be made right. They can't be made right on the timetable that I would desire and the timetable that you would desire. They can't be made right in the next week, in the next month, in the next year. We may never see them made right to our full and complete satisfaction. Again, that's not an argument for passivity or lack of action or turning away. But we need to have a proper perspective on who we are and what we're asking of ourselves as a community, as a nation, what we expect to be the fruit of this process. I hope and I pray that the Holy Father Pope Francis, for example, accepts the invitation that the bishops of Canada have already extended to him, specifically with regard to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's request for a visit and an apology. I hope that he accepts that. But as I discovered long ago in the receiving line at the funeral home in my hometown, and as I discovered once again when I got into the pulpit to preach at funerals and at vigil services, ultimately that's not going to be enough. It's just not. We're in a position today where what has happened is not enough. That's our considered judgment. I respect that judgment. But my own experience, the human experience that we have all shared, and the truths of our Catholic Christian faith teaches us that ultimately those purely human things aren't going to give us what we need, because what we need is fullness of life. Fullness of life. We need complete truth. We need beauty, goodness in its fullness. We need death to be defeated. We're not going to defeat death by our own purely human powers. We need to trust in the one who created us, the one who gives us and gave us life, the one who sustains us through each and every day of our life. Only in him will we find the answers we seek. We may not find them precisely in the moment we desire them. We may not find them given to us in the form that we would like to have them. But it's only in him that we will find what we seek. And all of us in this moment are seeking. We're seeking something better than what we have. We're seeking a world that isn't broken, a world that isn't sinful, a world in which evil has no place. We all are seeking that. And we all deserve that in a certain sense. We were all created for that, our Catholic Christian faith teaches us and tells us. But we won't win it, we won't accomplish it under our own power. We need to trust in our God. We need to trust in our Creator. We need to trust in his love. Again, as the saying goes, pray like everything depends on God, work like everything depends on you. It's true. We can't turn our heads or our eyes from this situation. But we do need to know what the situation is. We need to have a realistic understanding of our own limitations and of the limitations of what we can do for one another. And I pray that we're granted that grace, and that all of our expectations, all of our hopes, all of our desires for reconciliation, for peace, for justice, for fullness of life are one day fulfilled.